Well, welcome back to Del Paso Heights, Cracking an Epidemic. You know, we just saw the special, but we wanted to continue the discussion. And joining me now are four of my favorite friends here. We start with Mervyn Brookings, who as you saw him in the piece, he runs an organization, Brother to Brother. Next to him is Betty Williams. Betty Williams is the president of the NAACP here in Sacramento. Chief Kathy Lester from the Sacramento Police Department, and you just saw Gina Warren in this special. And Gina, I'm going to start with you because this whole thing began with the conversation we had. If just to give you a little bit of background, last year after the K Street shooting, KCRA asked me and Jack Noonan, photographer Jack Noonan, to go and do a series of stories looking at people and community groups who are trying to combat violence and cut down on crime. And when I interviewed Gina from the Neighborhood Wellness Foundation, Gina said, to look at the issue, you got to look at the root cause. And what did you mean by that?
Because we, we often see symptoms. We see people acting out, we see violence, we see substance abuse. And in order for us to address any issue or to mitigate it for that matter, you have to understand where it's coming from. And so it's almost as if, you know, putting back my clinician hat is just understanding that we have to get history. And when we get history, we can be more strategic in how we address the challenges.
What was your reaction to the special?
You know, it's like when I had called you and said, I wish we had more and more time, but I thought that what you captured was what it was. There were some multi-generational comments on there because you have different people growing up at different times, but Mervyn and I grew up there at the same time. It was the most incredible neighborhood, and I wanted that to be captured, and you understood that. But it also described what happened. And we want people to understand what happened so we can see the intergenerational impact that it had on our community.
And we had a conversation, I think last week. There's been a series of incidents that happened along Del Paso Boulevard, and you said what we need are resources.
Yes. We need resources because we know what happened. We understand very clearly what's going on. We now just need the resources because it's the people in the community that can help change the trajectory of the community. That's so critical for people to understand, is that with strategic partners, you have to include the people who have these life experiences in order to shift the trajectory. And
you're on the front lines, and so is Merv with his organization, really trying to focus and trying to steer at-risk youth in the right direction. How difficult is it in today's society to do that?
Well, it's extremely difficult because you have social media. And when something happens, the world knows about it. And that places a lot of pressure on the young individuals that we're trying to reach. We have to battle their immediate circumstances as well as the perception that they have that everybody knows. So, you know, in today's world of global social media, it's extremely difficult.
What do you tell them? How do you get them not to go? I mean, you talked about it, about you used to use fists, now they use guns. What do you do?
Well, it's difficult. These circumstances are different. The thing that best we can do is, as Gina said, we got to go back to where it all started and try to help them, give them a sense of reference of how they got to that point. And each situation is different, so we got to take one child at a time. And not only the youth that we're dealing with, we have to deal with the parents as well. We had a event a couple of months ago. We call it T-shirts for ties, and we bring in young men, and the goal is to teach them how to tie ties, give them breakfast, talk to them. What we discovered when we're bringing in these young men, we're teaching their fathers as well how to tie a tie. These are 30, 40-year-old men, so we can't just deal with the youth. We have to deal with the adults at the same time, and you know, that's challenging.
And Betty, we had a conversation. You grew up outside of Chicago, and you remember this period.
Yeah.
Between the 85 and 95. How much did race play into this?
It played a lot because crack cocaine was given different sentences versus powder cocaine. And they looked at African Americans differently, law enforcement did, and legislation did. And so it didn't matter what state or neighborhood you were in, African Americans in those communities were given the worst sentences, was treated less than human. There was no discussion. And so we as NAACP really had to look at who are we putting in office to oversee these communities that looks like me? And understand that those are challenges, those are like the opioid, what we're dealing with right now. I wish we would have had those type of commitments during the crack cocaine, because we don't have that now.
When we look at Del Paso Heights, it's an area that lost McClellan. Del Paso Boulevard was choked pretty much to death, essentially. How much do you fight, or how can you fight with city officials that, hey, we need Natomas, when they lost the Kings, they've now got the medical center, they've got the aquatic center. It's not East Sac, obviously, right? I mean, Del Paso Heights needs more.
They do need more, and I was one of the ones that was at City Hall fighting for other resources other than Aquatic Center, and I even said, they get Aquatic Center, we get a homeless shelter. And so the balance was different. Even when I first came into presidency, one of the past presidents, Mr. Wendell Echols, who grew up in Del Paso Heights, he came in educating me, saying we need to do more for Del Paso Heights. My past health chair, Dr. Alice Banks, who has a church in Del Paso Heights, came to me and said we need to do more than what they're doing right now. And so what they brought to me, their history was the city council at the time didn't do anything for those areas that's predominantly black in Del Paso Heights. However, there was money flowing, but on the other side of the tracks of people that didn't look like me for during that time. And so our job was to agitate as well as advocate for making sure that those resources came into play. And we're still fighting for that because it's still not enough.
Yeah, because you're not seeing it right now, are you?
No, we are not.
And Chief, I know you grew up here, so you know about this area and the era of crack cocaine. Talk about, we know we have things like ShotSpotter, where you can now sort of ping where a gunshot's coming from. You have cameras up in areas around Del Paso Heights. What are some of the things that you guys are doing behind the scenes to connect with that community?
Sure. So I started working in Del Paso Heights about 30 years ago, right in the middle of what we're talking about, what started a lot of this, which is the crack epidemic. Quite honestly, I don't think that I really understood what was going on as a young cop, even though I grew up in Sacramento, saw a lot of the challenges with the base closure. And it's taken years, I think, really to understand it, and having community partners, right, that we can have conversations. So there's absolutely, a need for public safety and the tools that we use, like ShotSpotter, enforcement. But I can tell you, we're not going to be able to move a community forward unless we are working with the community. And I know we talk about that, but it really is a shared responsibility. And what I love about Sacramento, and I've always loved about Sacramento, is that we're a big city, but we're a small enough community where everybody knows each other and we have a common goal. And I think it's how we as law enforcement look at our role and what we're tasked to do in the community. It really is about bringing public safety, and that's a big change. I know you talked about it in the documentary, where it was enforce, arrest. And you can have some impact on public safety, but you also create harm in neighborhoods because dads are going to prison. People, like Betty said, that we had disparate sentences, which is still a fight. So I think what we need to do as law enforcement is figure out what is the long game, what are we really trying to accomplish? And it's all the things we've talked about: youth programs, community resources, investment in those communities, community policing, and I think, honestly, the last few years of what we've been doing, I feel like we're really moving in the right direction. But it's not just because of the police, certainly. I mean, it's definitely a change in mindset, but it's because we really work as partners with a lot of groups. And the people around this table, I'll tell you what, you couldn't ask for a better team to try and change what a community looks like for the better. When
you have areas like we just had on Del Paso Boulevard where it becomes a hot spot, do you move officers there? Hey, we got to look at this area. This area has become a hot spot. Well, we certainly do. I mean, we have, we'll see spikes in crime. You see challenges. That's one of the things that we do. We address them, but we try and address them in a different way as well. You absolutely have to look. One thing that we've missed the mark on in law enforcement is looking at who's impacted by crime and who are the victims, and putting the victims of crime first. So what are we doing to try and help victims, right? So it's dual responsibility. Yes, bring down crime, but also really pay attention to what you're doing to support victims and move forward. And having said that, I
I think enforcement and certainly holding people accountable are a big part of what we do, but you have to have resources in place so that you can make people successful, that you can bring them to success, right? And that's one thing I think that's probably beyond the realm of just the police department. It's the judicial system, and it's our resources, and definitely our community-based organizations.
And Gina, let me ask you this. For someone who, I'm from Virginia Beach, I didn't know anything about Del Paso Heights until we started working on this. For someone who doesn't know who's watching in this community, what is something you want them to know about Del Paso Heights? Other than the stigma, right? We know about the stigma.
I grew up, I grew up in the most incredible neighborhood of Del Paso Heights. It was a place that fed my soul. And so that's why you see our organization, Mervin's organization, working as hard as we do. And we have to shift a gear because the social media. So as much as we want things to be like they were, they're not going to be. So we have to make the adjustment to what the challenges are now. And the social media allows people to see the things that are happening at real time. And so I think it's important for people to know that there are generations after generations after generations of folks who are still in Del Paso Heights.
Yeah.
So you see there's a huge commitment, not just with me and Mervin's organization, a lot of other organizations that are committed to the safety and the well-being of our community. And safety comes with education. Safety comes with increasing opportunities and equity in our community. So it's a lot deeper, and that's why I wanted to focus on the root cause so you can be strategic in how we improve things.
And I'll just throw this out to anyone who ever wants to take it. How do you break the cycle?
Well, one of the intended consequences of that crack era was to criminalize, almost criminalize being black. And with that came a sense of devaluing self and devaluing your community. And as Gina works so hard to get to that root, we're still suffering from that lack of value as a community. One of the examples that you spoke about, Del Paso Boulevard, Gina's husband, Mr. Alan Warren, invested in Del Paso Boulevard 20, 30 years ago when everyone was telling him, not to. Then he became our councilman.
Yep.
And when he did that, he had the biggest pushback from areas around Del Paso Heights because his message was simple: let's help Del Paso Heights catch up. None of the other communities around him supported him because there was no value for our community. So I think we got to start with, as Dr. Warren is doing, getting to the root cause, educating the community about itself so we can bring back that self-respect and that value to not only ourselves but to the communities around, how people see us.
And Betty, how do you break the cycle? Because we always talk about there's this cycle that was created by the epidemic. How do we break it?
First and foremost, I agree 100% with what Merv just said. The second piece is that we need to work together more. One of the things Merv and I was at, I can't even remember where it was, but at the end of that event, we came together and says, you need to have me on your legal team.
That's right.
And so,
It's a good person to have, right?
Exactly. And I agreed with that. We do need to work together because Merv and I have worked together on a couple of cases, a few cases actually, where we were able to get individuals either out of jail and prison. And so if we work closer together, including law enforcement, because you can't arrest this problem away. It's not, and the fact that we need to pull the families together. It's more, if an individual is arrested or on crack or has the historic knowledge or being part of that, it affects the entire family. And I absolutely feel that we need to get our faith base back in play with this. What I do know, when I went through it, because I came to California in '83, so it was starting up while I was still in Illinois. However, what I saw prior to that, our churches were very much involved. You had the church picnics and the Sunday schools, and they were the mentors. They were, in addition to coaches, they were everything. And I didn't see a lot of that involvement during this episode. And so I do think our faith base need to come forward and do more than what has been done in the past.
And obviously what's concerning is we're seeing the victims become younger and younger. I mean, 13-year-olds who are not only the victims, but also suspects.
Yep, carrying guns. Yep, it's horrible. And when you talk to everyone in the community, we talk about how you need more youth programs, we need more resources, you need to get people on a path to being self-sufficient, getting a job, having a mentor, right? But then we also need to look at it differently. I learned something from Gina, and I use this all the time.
She's so knowledgeable,
She's
right?
very knowledgeable, and I would tell you, I use this a lot because it puts your mind in the right spot. When you, like, we deal with people in crisis all the time, right? We're the first ones you call, and it's about trying to figure out how to help them. It's not like, hey, what's wrong and why are you like this, but what happened to you? Like, so when the police come in, we're way past the social context that you were born into and all of the challenges, right? And so we have a really unique opportunity to help people at that stage, right? By knowing partners in our community. So, you know, it's not, when you're talking about public safety, it's not enforcement. It's about really trying to solve the challenges. And a lot of it isn't a law enforcement issue. It's everything that went into the day that we have contact with somebody and why we got called there in the first place.
Well, for someone who didn't know much about Del Paso Heights, I just want to say thank you for what you guys do, because I know everyone here is on the front lines essentially with trying, because it affects us all, trying to cut down on violence, cut down on crime. I appreciate the discussion here today. Obviously, this is a very complex issue, and it's a discussion that doesn't end here. In full disclosure, we did contact Councilman Sean Malloy, who represents Del Paso Heights in that district, and we contacted him about a month ago, and he said he'd be here, and about an hour before we were going to do this discussion, he canceled on us and said he had another conflict. So, you know, we talked about resources and resources going into the community, and we wanted to ask him, what are you doing for Del Paso Heights? Unfortunately, we didn't have that chance, but we appreciate everyone coming here. And Golston and Edie, I'm going to send it back to you.